Welcome back to my channel. I had this fun idea to kind of try and possibly make this into a series. I'm gonna see how this first video goes and see how I like it before I commit myself to a full series. But I was thinking the other day how I never pick up books now unless I have reviewed the Goodreads page and checked the rating and read the top reviews. And when I'm in the bookstore nowadays, I will pick up books that maybe I have never heard of, and then I'm immediately pulling up Goodreads. I'm seeing if it's a 4-star or higher. I thought about that and I was like, that is so sad because some of my favorite books are not 4 stars or above. And I'm missing out on so many books because I'm basing it off of Goodreads. And the last couple of months or so, my reviews and my ratings haven't really lined up with the popular reviews and the popular ratings for those books, especially the popular books. So I thought I would maybe try something different. And I was thinking, I was like, how can I do this and make it kind of fun for myself and kind of get myself outside of my comfort zone? So I've made a little like roulette wheel of genres, and I am going to spin it twice and then get 2 genres. And I am going to go to the bookstore and I'm going to blindly pick a book based off of just that genre and my own feelings towards the book versus me basing it off of whether or not Goodreads likes it. That is the challenge, and I'm gonna see if my radar of picking my own book based on my own preferences lands me with books that I like more so than just basing it off of Goodreads. The little book this year that kind of inspired me to do that was Lie With Me. This book was really the only random book pickup that I made this year. All the other books I've kind of looked at their Goodreads, and this book I went into Barnes and Nobles really blind. I just started looking through the shelves like I used to do before checking Goodreads. I saw this book, I liked the blurb, I liked the summary, and it really called to me. And this ended up being one of my favorite books this year. I still think about a couple quotes and a couple lines in this book. I am so glad that I picked it up. And if I would have just only gone off of Goodreads and picked books based on that, might never have heard of this book or picked it up. So I don't want to miss out on any more books. And I'm going to see if I can pick out a better book for myself than worrying about what Goodreads thinks about it. The genres I put in here, I did like every genre across the board that I can think of. I may have missed some, but I have fantasy, sci-fi, lit fic, horror, nonfiction, romance, YA, mystery, thriller, memoir, collection, which I'm going to include essay collections or short story collections or poetry collections, and historical fiction. So I feel like that's a pretty good roundup of the most popular book genres. Okay, so let's do my first spin. Oh, I got so lucky. I got one of my favorite genres, which is memoir. So I will be picking out a book out of the memoir section. This is my last one. This will be my second pick. Is going to be lit fic. So basically my two favorite genres. So I don't think this is going to be that hard for me to find a book. I was a little nervous if it landed in mystery or collection because I don't really read that much from those two genres. I literally got the top two genres that I like to read. So yeah, let's go to the bookstore and let's blindly pick out a book in each of those genres. Hello, so here we are. We're in the car. I'm right outside Barnes and Noble. So we are going to be going in and picking out a memoir and a literary fiction. Hopefully it's not too busy in there and I don't have to like awkwardly hover around people in those sections. So let's see how it goes. Hi, so we are back home now. As you will see or can see from the clips that I'm going to share from the bookstore, I did not have a ton of courage, and a lot of my clips are going to be filmed vertical because I felt like when I was filming vertical, people could have thought I was just looking at my phone. And if I turned it horizontal to take actual good video, the ruse would have been up and everybody would have known I was filming, even though nobody cares. I cared and I was too self conscious, so I didn't do it. But I did take some clips that I could. I took a lot more clips in the memoir section just because there was only like me and like one other person passing through most of the time. The fiction section, as usual, is always really crowded. So I didn't take a ton of video in the fiction section just because there was a lot of people walking around in there. So I started out in the memoir section, and I was they have a pretty good memoir section. It's mostly biography and memoir in this one section. And I want to say it's like 3 or 4 like bookshelves. And there's only maybe one to at the most like 3 copies of each book. So they fit a lot of memoirs and biographies into that little area. And so I kind of was perusing. It was kind of hard because I have perused that area often. So there was a lot of books there that I have already looked up on Goodreads, already had an idea. So I was really, really trying to pick books that one I'd never looked up on Goodreads, and even if I could even go further, one that I had never even heard of. So I was looking around and I actually saw, well, let me share what I picked. So I chose Consent by Vanessa Springora. I believe this is a translated work from the French. Well, it came out in 2020 and then the translation came out in 2021. And when I first saw like the spine, it just said consent on it. I thought it was another book that I was actually interested in, that I'd heard of, that I think I have on my want to read TBR and Goodreads. So I kind of passed it and I was like, oh, I already kind of know about that book. I can't choose it. And then I actually found the book that I was thinking of later on in like another shelf. And so I was like, oh, okay, that consent is not one that I've heard of. And so I went and looked at it again. I think what kind of pushed me to get this book was the summary. It says, a bold indictment of complicity culture, Vanessa Springora's stunning memoir re-examines a disturbing adolescent relationship with an influential older writer in 1980s Paris. It triggered a cultural reckoning in France and became an international sensation. So the fact that this created kind of like a big stir when it came out in France, it really intrigued me and I wanted to read more. I ended up picking this one, and it's pretty slim. It's not too long. I think it's like under 200 pages. So I felt like it was going to be a really quality, quick read. I ended up picking this one. So we shall see how this one goes. I'm actually really, really excited for it. I mean, I read a couple passages just to kind of get the vibe of the writing. And I really liked the prose. I really liked how the writing style, never heard of it before, which was an added bonus. And obviously, if I've never heard of it, I never looked it up on Goodreads. So that was my memoir choice. Now, the fiction was a lot harder because I was really trying to stick with literary fiction. And obviously, in the fiction section, it's huge. You have romance, you have historical fiction. I ended up coming across this book at the very end. It's called The Furrows by Namwali Serpel. I think that's how you pronounce that name, hopefully. And kind of what grabbed me was I was getting to a point where I was like, I really need to find a book, and I keep pulling out books that I've either heard of or that were historical fiction, or just I wasn't plain interested in them at all. So I was just pulling them out, looking at the covers really quick, and I pulled this one out and it kind of grabbed me. And I think what really made me want to look into it was it said one of the New York Times 10 best books of the year. So every year, the New York Times comes out with a list of their 10 best books of the year, obviously self explanatory by that. So I was like, okay. So I ended up looking at the back, and it said it was named one of the best books of the year by the New Yorker, Oprah Daily, Time, the Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, Esquire, Vulture, Vox. Wow, that's a lot of publications that have put that on their lists. And then, and then still sometimes I'm a little wary because I sometimes feel like publications can be kind of like bought by publishing to put up books on their list, whether or not they're actually that good. So I was still a little bit wary. But then it said it was one of Barack Obama's favorite books of the year. So I was like, okay, I definitely have seen Barack Obama's lists that he puts out on like music and reading and everything. And usually his reading list is not, it's maybe like 10 books. It's not a super long list. And this one made the top 10 for the year. That was really intriguing. That's kind of what made this decision for me. And then it also said it's a New York Times notable book of the year, which it was also his 10 best books of the year. So I'm assuming that's probably the same list. And then reading the summary, I was like, yes, perfect. So it says Cassandra Williams is 12 when her little brother Wayne goes missing in an accident. As C grows older, she sees her brother everywhere in bistros, airplane aisles, subway cars. Here is her brother's face, the light in his eyes, the way he seems to recognize her too. But it can't be, of course. Or can it? Then one day, in another accident, she meets a man both mysterious and familiar, a man who is also searching for someone and for his own place in the world. His name is Wayne. In an enthralling narrative that defies expectations and blurs the line between our dreams and our waking lives, Namwali Serpel's remarkable novel is a bold exploration of memory that twists unexpectedly into a story of mistaken identity, double consciousness, and the wishful and sometimes willful longing for reunion with those we love the most. This is a book that I would be interested in, nonetheless, of all the accolades. It sounds really interesting. Felt like it fit the challenge really, really well. So I'm super excited for this one. And I'd never heard of it. I don't think I've even heard of anybody talk about it. So that's my fiction choice. So I think I'm going to read the memoir first, since it is the shorter of the two. And I can probably finish this in a day or two. And then I will take you along as I read it and my thoughts, and then we'll do the Furrows second, and I will do the same. So let's start reading. So I'm about halfway through. I'm definitely going to finish this book in one day. It is a very easy read in the sense of it's a quick page turner, but it definitely is heavy. Obviously, the premise of this book is heavy, and it sets up the book kind of sets up to show why the author is more vulnerable to a sexual predator. She talks about in the first page, she says, "At the threshold of life, unblemished by experience, my name is V, and at the grand old age of 5, I am waiting for love. Fathers are meant to be their daughters' protectors. Mine is no more than a current of air." So, very, very sad. She's definitely, I mean, to put it in like slang, has daddy issues from the get-go. Her parents get divorced or separate very early on, and her father slowly just disappears from her life. And she obviously shows that she is really affected by that absence in her life. And her mother, unfortunately, does not help the situation. Her mother is very distant, and so she's kind of on her own. She's very independent. So she meets the man who goes by G when she's 14, and he actually is one of her mother's friends. He gives her a lot of attention, and he treats her like she's an adult and that she is very mature for her age. And even her mother says that multiple times throughout, that you're very mature for your age. And her mom, unfortunately, knows what this situation is going on and does nothing to get her daughter out of it and lets it happen. And so all the adults are kind of failing her in her life. Gives her a lot of attention. He treats her like she's the love of his life. And at 14, she is enthralled with that. And she is also really intrigued by him because he is a writer and he is an artist. And it is a big commentary in this book that artists are often given more liberal boundaries than maybe people of other professions. And why is that the case? And because he's a writer, he gets away with a lot more things than maybe somebody of a different profession. And even in his books, he writes about all of his encounters with children. And so it is out there. It is not a secret, it's really disgusting. It's really sad. She's just kind of failed on all sides. She's failed by her parents, she's failed by the adults in her life, she's failed by her society, community, everything. It is very, very good though. Like, it's beautifully written. So I'm interested to see kind of where it goes and how she kind of takes a turn, because right now she is, you know, she's very much obsessed with him and is a kid, so she doesn't realize that this isn't okay. So it is the next day, and I finished Consent. I really enjoyed this book. I think I read it in one day. It was super easy to breeze through. The last time I checked in, I think I was like halfway through. And I was basically at the point where we had kind of seen how she grew up as a child, which made her extra vulnerable to, she was just more vulnerable to being groomed, basically. And she meets a friend of her mother's at 14 who basically grooms her and takes her on as his lover, as he calls it, which is really gross and sick because this man is like 50 years old and she's 14. The man that grooms her is also a writer, he's an artist. And the author says throughout that he is given more flexibility and more, not flexibility, he's given more slack than maybe somebody of a different occupation because it is part of his art and he's an artist, and they are more liberal with their feelings and their emotions, and they can live a different life than, I guess, non art type people are. I'm not explaining this as eloquently as I would like. I did write some notes down while I was reading. Oh, something that I really thought that was unique to this story is a lot of times when you hear other stories of young children or getting groomed and sexually abused, the children think that they have to keep their predator a secret, or they don't want to tell anybody because they're ashamed to it or whatnot. And the unique thing about this story is a lot of adults knew. Like I said before, her mother knew, the police knew, a lot of family friends knew. Her father found out, who was very absent. He was an absentee father, but he also found out. Like, all the adults in her life failed her, and a lot of people knew. And that was a really interesting part of this story, because in a lot of the other stories, like I said, nobody really knows, or not a lot of people know. But in this one, a lot of people knew, and it still didn't make a difference for her. And she was still in this relationship for like 2 years, I think. So that was really disgusting. And the one thing that I really liked, I mean, I guess you can imagine this isn't a spoiler, but you can imagine when she does move on from this relationship, he continues to kind of like haunt her. And as she grows up, she's always been really interested in writing as well. She kind of pursues a career in publishing and writing. He releases like stories or books that she is literally named in those stories and books. Like, it's using the same first letter of her name. It includes letters that she wrote to him when she was young and in this relationship with him. So he publishes all of these things against her permission, and continues to haunt and abuse her as she's an adult by making public what happened. And she can't find any legal recourse to hold it against him or to get him to stop doing it, unfortunately. So he continues to metaphorically abuse her even as an adult. And this book was kind of her chance to fight back and really serve it to him how he served it to her, and write the truth about what really happened. And I think that is why this book became so popular, because this story is about a real people. And the person that abused her is a very famous writer in France and has won different book awards. So she basically made it known, like, there was no allusion to who this person is. She provides a lot of detail where you can figure out who she is talking about. So I found that really amazing how she used this very thing that he was using against her against him, and it allowed her to have the final last word and to put an end to the abuse. There was a quote at the end. She basically said, was able to ensnare the hunter in his own traps. She was able to use what he was using against her and put it out there and put it in a book and give her side of the story and basically shame him after all the shaming and years of abuse that he did to her. So I really loved that about this book. I can see why it was really popular at the time, because I'm sure this opened the eyes to a lot of people in publishing. It opened the eyes to a lot of people of this figure. He's still alive. I went and like Wikipedia this immediately after finishing. He's still alive today. The statute of limitations is up, so really she can't do anything against this man legally. And this was her way to put an end to all the abuse and put her side of the story out there and kind of end it on her terms. Really beautiful book. Really enjoyed it. So glad I picked this up. I'm going to be moving on to the other book that I blindly picked, The Furrows, which was my literary fiction pick. And I will be taking you along with me as I read that one. And then at the very end, we can look up the Goodreads ratings and see if they're similar to my rating. And I ended up giving this 5 stars. So amazing. I am officially 100 pages in The Furrows. I'm really enjoying it so far. It starts out with the passing of her brother. Her brother is 7 years old and she is 12. And she talks about how her parents don't really watch them or don't really have a lot of supervision over them. They do whatever they want, and they usually go during the summers to the local beach and they walk there and they spend the day there, play, and then come home. And she has a very maternal view of her brother, since they do have a pretty sizable age gap. I think 5 years at this age is pretty sizable. She's kind of the one that supervises her brother, and she talks about how they were playing like they always are, and then the weather changes rapidly and her brother basically gets caught up in the water. Well, she ends up going into the water to try to save him, and she finds him, but then because of like the turbulent water and probably the riptide and the waves crashing on them, she ends up losing her brother in the water and getting washed ashore. And she talks about her brother being taken in by the furrows and using that as kind of like a metaphor for the water that just keeps coming and pummeling them. She wakes up unconscious. She kind of goes in and out. She kind of blacks out and goes in and out of consciousness. So she can't quite remember where she is, what's going on. And then basically her parents are like, "Where's your brother? Where's your brother?" And she can't tell them and she doesn't know. And it's kind of a hard story because she, her parents don't, her parents have to take her word for it, but they can't find a body. So they don't know, like, did her brother drown? Did her brother get kidnapped? Did he run away? Her parents are kind of just having to take her word for it. And her mother, through her grief, just establishes that she doesn't believe her story and thinks her brother is still out there. And so I think she carries a lot of this grief and a burden on her shoulders because she's the last person to see her brother alive. And so far throughout, it's kind of her continuing on in life. And she's having a lot of moments where she's re-losing her brother. She's describing another way that her brother dies. And I'm still trying to figure it out. I think they're kind of like little vignettes of either unconsciousness or just, it's just a poetic, prosy way to describe her losing her brother again and again. Hard to explain this book, but it is very poetic and prosy. And it's one of those books that, unless you're reading yourself, sometimes it's hard for someone to kind of like connect these things and explain it to you. But basically, she's re-losing her brother in different scenarios and he's dying in different ways. And at the end of each story, she's left not knowing what happened to her brother. And she's kind of reliving that absence and being the last person to see him, and no one else basically she can talk to about it. But yeah, it's very, very good so far. It's a page turner for sure. I got through 100 pages. I started it last night and I'm really liking it so far. It's definitely, like I said, it's one of those books that it's really hard to describe, but when you're reading it, you're getting it, it's linking, because it really does deal with memory and illusions and grief and absence and all these things that are done in a specific writing style that is not easy to explain as like a solid plot line, you know? So, anyway, so far, really liking it. I will continue tonight. I can't imagine me not finishing this in the next few days. Furrows. The Furrows. I had such high hopes for you. This had so many accolades on it. And the first half of the book, I was like, yes, I get it. Yes, this is so good. This is just like up my alley. I love it. And then we got to the second half of the book. You're kind of following her, and she is meeting these different figures, these different men that are giving her the same like vibe or like energy as her brother would have if he had kept getting older and kept living and obviously maturing. And so she comes across all these different guys, and then she meets this one specific character, and he is really she really gravitates towards him and he gravitates towards her. And then the book switches and you go into part 2, and this is from his perspective, from this man's perspective. And basically you're kind of following along, and he knows that he has the same name as her brother, and he knows something about her, but you don't, or more about her than he's alluding to, and you kind of can't figure out what it is. It's a different tone. It takes on a different part of the story. It takes you a different direction. The whole first half of this book is about grief, about trying to move on with your life when you find things that remind you of that person, or letting go little by little. And then the second half, following this other character, it kind of feels like it's obsession or stalking. And it didn't make sense. Like, I don't know why we had to start a whole different perspective and a whole different story. It just felt like two books in one, to be honest. I don't really know what the purpose of that was. So I did not like the second half. I felt like we were really going somewhere in the first half, and then that ends, and then we go somewhere different in the second half. And there's also these tones of like, he's my brother, but then they're like, you know, having relations with each other. And I'm like, that's giving gross brother sister vibes that I don't want. So, eh, unfortunately, the second half really brought this down. The first half, I was like 4, maybe 5 stars. I was really vibing with it. And then that second half hit, and I was like, where the fuck are we going with this, basically? Unfortunately, I think I'm going to give this 3 star. Like I said, the first half was like 4, 5 star, and then the second half was like 2, 3, high, like high twos, 3 star ish. So I'm just gonna land at a 3. I almost wanted to give it a 2 just because I was so pissed off with the turn that it took. But overall, this book was fine. It was entertaining. I think if we had just had that first half and the author had continued that theme and that story, I would have been like, this is a 5 star. But because it took such a turn and I didn't like that second part, I can't do it. So I think I'm going to give it a 3 star. So I thought, now that I have finished my 2 books, I would go into the Goodreads and see what people rated them and see if I have come close, if I am the same as kind of what the general Goodreads rating is, or if I'm very different. So we'll do Furrows first, since I'm just talked about Furrows. So let's see. Let me grab my phone. Okay. So the Furrows has a 3.21. Not surprising. I think hopefully because people have this similar thought process as I do, This review says 2.5 stars rounded up. This novel felt like it was about the depths of grief and loss, and it's a stunning portrayal of a family coping with that loss, the emotional trauma, the impact of it on them. Yes, yes, yes. However, it's one of those books that I didn't quite get what was happening, in particular, part two. Yes. See, I knew this was going to be probably a general consensus. I mean, some people really love this book. Says this, see, even this like 5-star review says, frankly, Cassandra's voice is sorely missed when the narrators switch. After sharing so much emotional turmoil, I mourned the intimacy that had been nurtured. I wanted to hear Cassandra telling me she was on the way to becoming whole again. But of course, the gulf that is Wayne's absence can never be filled. We do not lose her, we just see her continue the struggle from a different set of eyes. Yeah, it just changes perspective, and you kind of grow and really enjoy it from her perspective, and it really switches. So, Furrows got a 3.2. I think that's a pretty fair rating. And then now let's do Consent, which was my memoir pick, which I gave a 5 star. Oh, let me spell it correctly. There it is. Oh, it's the French version, but 4.3. Yes, yes. I agree with this. Fair. I gave this 5 star. I think obviously there's like never going to be any Goodreads rating that is a 5 star. It's always going to be 4 point something. But 4.3 is very high for Goodreads. It looks like most people are giving it 4 or 5 stars. Obviously, I can't read a lot of the reviews since a lot of them are in French, which makes sense since this is a French translation. I think that I was pretty spot on. First of all, I probably would not have picked up these books at Barnes and Nobles because, like I said in the beginning of this video, a lot of times I'm going to Barnes and Noble and I'm grabbing books that I have heard something about that is already on my TBR. I'm not blindly wandering like I would have maybe 10 years ago. So that was the whole point of this experiment, to kind of pick out books that I didn't have on my TBR that I haven't heard anything about. I think even though the Furrows I only gave 3 stars, I think I still got something out of it. I still enjoyed the themes that it brought up, and it's definitely one where I'm going to remember it. It's not one that I'm just gonna like forget immediately about. And Consent is like a great memoir. It's probably one of my favorites this year. I really enjoyed that story. Again, that's another book I never heard of. I probably wouldn't have picked up. I was happy with those two books after my reading of them. It was a good challenge. I think it was pretty successful. I would like to continue to do this. I don't know if I'm going to do it monthly, but I would like to continue to do it, and especially do it with the genres that I'm not familiar with, because I'm pretty familiar with memoirs and literary fiction. So this was kind of an easy start for me in this, but in a larger scale of, instead of 2 books, like over a longer period of time with more books, how successful I am in just picking out my own books instead of relying on Goodreads to do it for me. Overall, I really liked this experiment. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I did, and I hope that I can continue this series. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.